The morning sunlight streaming through the window of a small house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, gently illuminated Janet Watson's tired face as she sat at the kitchen table. She took a sip of coffee and glanced at the wall clock. It was almost 7 o'clock, time to wake up her son Michael. "Michael, time to get up," she called toward the second floor. "You'll be late for school." There was no answer. Janet sighed and began climbing the stairs. When she gently opened the door to her 10-year-old son's room, Michael was still asleep, wrapped in his blanket. In the corner of the room, robot parts were scattered, half-assembled. "Stayed up late again," Janet whispered and gently shook her son's shoulder. "Michael, it's school time. Wake up." Michael slowly opened his eyes, revealing an anxious expression. "I have a math test today." Janet tenderly stroked her son's brown hair. "We studied together yesterday. You'll be fine." Michael nodded silently, but there was no confidence in his eyes. School performance was his weakness, especially math. Sometimes his classmates called him slowpoke, and he usually spent recess alone. Janet, despite being busy with her job at the accounting firm, tried desperately to help Michael with his homework, attend teacher conferences, and support his growth. However, being a single mother was much harder than she had imagined. The 3 years since her husband Thomas died in a car accident had been the most difficult period of her life. After hurriedly finishing breakfast, Janet drove Michael to school. "Do your best," she encouraged him. Michael showed a slight smile and headed toward the school building with his heavy backpack. Watching his small back walk away, Janet felt a tightness in her chest. In the car on her way to work, her cell phone rang. Her sister Amy's name appeared on the screen. "Good morning, Amy," Janet answered. "Janet." Perfect timing, Amy's voice was full of energy. "I wanted to confirm the details for Brittany's birthday party this Saturday. You and Michael can come, right?" Janet hesitated for a moment. Gatherings with Amy's family always brought complicated emotions. "Yes, of course we'll be there." Amy was a successful lawyer. Her husband James, a real estate developer, had just built a new home in Cedar Rapids' most affluent neighborhood. Their daughter Brittany, also 10 like Michael, was known as a top student at school. She won math competitions, received spelling bee awards, and was constantly showered with praise from the family. "Wonderful," Amy continued. "Mom and Dad will be there, of course, and a few other relatives too. Brittany is so excited." Janet smiled, but the smile couldn't be transmitted through the phone. "I understand. Is there anything I should bring?" "Nothing needed. Just you and Michael being there." Amy paused for a moment and changed her tone. "By the way, how is Michael doing?" "School." Janet's stomach tightened at the question. "Well, he's doing his best in his own way." "I see." There was obvious sympathy in Amy's voice. "If Brittany can help him with anything, just let me know. She got another 100 on her math test recently." "Thanks, but we're fine," Janet quickly tried to end the conversation. "I'm on my way to work. See you Saturday." After hanging up, Janet gripped the steering wheel tightly. Amy probably meant no harm, but her words always felt like sharp needles. When she visited her parents' house for weekend lunch, such pain became even more vivid. Martha and David Watson had lived in Cedar Rapids for over 40 years. David was a retired high school teacher, and Martha a former nurse. "Michael, how was your recent math test?" Martha asked during the meal. Michael remained silent, continuing to play with his mashed potatoes using his fork. "He's trying his best," Janet answered quietly. "Trying isn't enough," Martha shook her head. "Do you know what place Brittany got in the state math competition recently?" "First place," Janet answered automatically. She had already heard this story multiple times. "Yes, first place," Martha proclaimed proudly. Amy's child is always excellent. David, she inherited your teacher genes. David nodded with satisfaction. Brittany is a special child. I look forward to her future. Janet glanced at her son. Michael continued eating in silence, his shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on his plate. Her heart ached for her son. Michael got a good evaluation on his science experiment last week. Janet tried to change the direction of the conversation. That's nice, Martha said, but without enthusiasm. But basic academic skills are important. What will he do in the future if he can't do math? David nodded in agreement. Education is the most important thing in this family. It's the Watson family tradition. Janet didn't argue further. She was tired of this pattern that had persisted for years. For her parents, Amy and her family were symbols of success, while Janet and Michael were, what? Failures? Unfortunate exceptions. On the way home, Michael unusually spoke up. Don't Grandma and Grandpa like me? Janet caught her breath. Of course they like you, Michael. They just have old-fashioned ideas. They don't understand that school grades aren't everything. Michael stared out the window. But Brittany is smart, isn't she? Not like me. You're smart too, just in different ways, Janet said without taking her eyes off the road. They'd be amazed if they knew about your robots. Michael shrugged slightly. Maybe. As the week passed, Saturday approached. Amy's text message said the party would start at 2 p.m. and would also serve as a housewarming. Janet wrapped Brittany's present, a science experiment kit, fixed Michael's hair, and prepared for the party. Amy and James's new home was in Willow Creek Estates, Cedar Rapids' most upscale neighborhood. The two-story white mansion was surrounded by a spacious front yard and well-maintained gardens. When Janet parked her old sedan, Michael stared at the new house through the window, his mouth slightly open. It's really big, he whispered. Janet smiled. Yes, but the size of a house doesn't measure the amount of happiness inside. When they rang the doorbell, Amy greeted them wearing an elegant dress. Janet, Michael. So glad you could come. Please come in. Inside, the house was already bustling with relatives and friends. Colorful balloons and ribbons hung from the ceiling, and a large banner reading, "Happy Birthday, Brittany," decorated the living room wall. A group of children were making noise in front of a gaming console, while adults enjoyed conversation in the kitchen and dining areas with champagne glasses in hand. Brittany's in the backyard with her friends, Amy said, then pointed to a table. Put the present there. We'll have cake soon. While Janet was placing the present, Michael quietly retreated to a corner of the room. Instead of joining the other children, he sat in an empty chair and took out a small electronic puzzle he had brought. Janet, you made it. Martha's voice echoed as Janet's mother approached with her husband David. Isn't this house amazing? Amy and James have done well for themselves. Yes, it's lovely, Janet agreed. Oh, why isn't Michael playing with the other children? Martha frowned when she spotted her grandson. Why don't you introduce him to Brittany's friends? Janet answered quietly, he's shy. Give him time. As the party progressed, Brittany became the center of attention. With a bright smile, she opened present after present, thanking everyone politely for each. James captured everything with an expensive camera, while Amy stood proudly beside her daughter. I'd do anything for my wonderful granddaughter, Martha declared loudly, putting her arm around Brittany's shoulders. I've never seen such a smart and beautiful child. At the height of the celebration, everyone gathered around the dining table where an elaborate meal was served. Michael sat quietly next to Janet, barely speaking. Michael, Martha suddenly called from across the table. How was your recent math test? The conversation quieted as all eyes turned to the boy. Michael sank deep into his chair and answered in a small voice, it was okay. Okay, isn't good enough, David sighed. Excellence is expected in this family. Janet squeezed her son's hand. Michael is trying very hard. Grandma, look! Brittany suddenly exclaimed, pulling a shining gold medal from her new bag. I got this at the state math competition last week. Wonderful! Martha cheered. Let me see it. Amy smiled with satisfaction. Brittany's teacher says she has a special talent. She's always at the top of her class. The atmosphere at the table grew heavy, with an uncomfortable silence. Janet felt something bitter in the back of her throat. Michael's expression froze, and he remained motionless, staring at his plate. Speaking of which, Martha broke the silence, laughing loudly. Only the smart sister's child is a true grandchild. Teach some studying to this family's embarrassment. Janet's heart nearly stopped. Some relatives at the table looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. Amy, seemingly unaware of the gravity of the statement, joined in proudly. That's because she has big sister's genes. There's no hope. Laughter rose from parts of the table, sounding like sharp knives to Janet's ears. She trembled with anger but couldn't find her words. Michael slowly stood up. His small body was shaking, and tears glistened in his eyes. Am I really an embarrassment to the family? His voice echoed throughout the room. For a moment, everyone fell silent. Amy looked at her sister with a confused expression. David uncomfortably averted his eyes, and Martha pursed her lips. Of course not. Janet finally regained her voice and placed her hand on her son's shoulder. Her eyes burned with anger and sadness, but instead of exploding, she chose to protect her son. You're a wonderful child, Michael. The party continued in an awkward atmosphere. Cake was served, songs were sung, and Brittany blew out her candles. However, for Janet and Michael, the celebratory atmosphere was permanently broken. Michael took refuge in the bathroom, and Janet followed to comfort him. She stood in front of the closed door and knocked gently. Michael, are you okay? Sobbing sounds came from inside. Why am I no good? Why can't I be like Brittany? Janet felt her heart being torn apart. Michael, open the door. The door slowly opened, and her son appeared with tear-blurred eyes. Janet hugged him tightly. It's okay to be who you are. Being different isn't bad. But Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Amy. They're wrong, Janet said, looking into her son's eyes. They just don't know the real you yet. Michael trembled in his mother's arms. Janet made a decision. This wouldn't end here. It was time to tell the truth. When Janet and Michael returned to the party, dessert time had begun. An elaborate ice cream cake was placed in the center of the table, and the children's eyes sparkled with anticipation. On the surface, everything seemed to have returned to normal. However, inside Janet, a quiet flame of anger continued to burn. Michael sat down silently, keeping his eyes down while poking at a small piece of cake with his fork. Across the room, Brittany was laughing with her friends, talking about her new presents. After dessert, we'll play games in the garden, Amy announced. James has prepared a wonderful treasure hunt. Awesome! Brittany burst with joy. I love treasure hunts. Martha gently stroked her granddaughter's head, then shifted her gaze to Michael. Michael, this is a good opportunity. Why don't you join Brittany? You could learn a lot from her. The words were disguised as kindness, but their underlying meaning was clear. Janet bit her lip. Yes, Amy agreed. Michael, make sure you study hard for your next test. Don't bring shame to this family. You should learn from my daughter. She knows how to make an effort. That was the limit of Janet's patience. She slowly stood up, causing silence in the room. All eyes turned to her. Amy, Mom, her voice was quiet but sharp. That's enough. What do you mean? Martha showed a confused expression. Janet reached into her handbag and pulled out a glossy photograph from an inside pocket. She placed it in the center of the table. This is what you call the family's embarrassment. The photo showed Michael holding a large trophy, beaming with a gap-toothed smile. Next to him was a small robot with complex mechanisms, and in the background, a banner reading National Junior Robotics Competition was visible. The room suddenly fell silent. Amy and Brittany were stunned, David and Martha were speechless. Even the children stopped their conversations and sent curious glances. When was this? David was the first to squeeze out words. Last fall, Janet answered calmly. Michael won first place in the junior division of the national competition. Out of more than 100 participants. But, why didn't you tell us? Martha asked with a confused expression. Janet looked straight into her mother's eyes. Have you ever asked about Michael beyond his report card? David and Martha looked down shamefully. Amy tried to speak but couldn't find the words. Michael has been obsessed with robots since he was 5, Janet continued. Her voice gradually filled with passion. When his father was alive, they built small robot kits together. After Thomas died, Michael didn't lose that passion. Michael sat quietly, but hearing his mother's words, he straightened his back a little. His eyes were fixed on the photograph. He stays up late every night working on his projects. He might struggle with schoolwork, but he's taught himself programming and engineering principles. Isn't that incredible for a 10-year-old? No one could argue. Brittany approached the photo and looked at Michael with an expression of amazement. Did you really make this? Michael nodded slightly. Yes. How did you make it? Brittany's voice held genuine curiosity. For the first time, a small expression of pride appeared on Michael's face. I collected parts from unused appliances and researched online. Amazing! Brittany exclaimed, seemingly genuinely impressed. Amy asked with a confused expression, but why didn't you tell anyone? About something so wonderful. Janet shrugged. It was always about school grades. You kept saying excellence is expected in this family. But excellence comes in many forms. Michael shines in his own way. During the uncomfortable silence that followed, suddenly a voice was heard from the dining room entrance. I think we should all be honest. Everyone turned to see James, Amy's husband, standing in the doorway. In his hand was Brittany's homework book. James, what are you doing? Amy asked in a confused voice. I found this while organizing Brittany's desk this morning, he said quietly. Brittany, you should tell your mother about using answers from your teacher to do your homework. A silence like a bomb dropping spread through the room. The color drained from Brittany's face, and tears welled in her eyes. Brittany? Is this true? Amy looked at her daughter with disbelief. The girl nodded with trembling lips. I'm sorry. She began to sob. Everyone always says I'm smart, and I felt I had to live up to expectations, so I copied answers from the teacher's desk or borrowed notes from friends. Amy collapsed into a chair. Martha tried to embrace her granddaughter, but Brittany stepped back. I'm not really that smart, she said desperately. But because everyone expected it. I had to lie. The room fell silent. David and Martha were stunned, and Amy covered her face in sadness and confusion. Then something unexpected happened. Michael quietly stood up and went to his cousin's side. He said in a small voice to Brittany, I couldn't make robots well at first either. I failed many times, but I didn't give up and kept going. If you really try hard, you can do well without stealing answers. Surprised by Michael's unexpected kindness, a small light of hope shone on Brittany's tearful face. It was a moment when a true bond formed between the two children for the first time. Janet stroked Michael's head and said quietly, this is my son. His grades might not be the best, but he has a heart that cares for others in trouble. That's what matters most to me." Her words echoed throughout the room, and Amy and their parents were shocked by the error in their judgment. The truth was revealed, and it was time for each of them to face themselves. In the days that followed, a heavy silence enveloped the entire family. Janet drove Michael to and from school and worked as usual, but there were no calls from Amy or contact from her parents. She didn't regret her actions, but in the corner of her mind was anxiety that the family rift had deepened. On Tuesday evening, as Janet was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, David and Martha were standing there. Both wore uneasy expressions. "May we come in?" David asked quietly. Janet hesitated for a moment, then widened the door. "Please do." The two entered the living room and sat with stiff expressions. Martha nervously clutched her handbag on her lap. "Where's Michael?" David asked. "In his room. Working on his robot," Janet answered. Martha took a deep breath. "Could we see his work?" Janet was surprised but nodded and went upstairs. Shortly after, she returned with Michael. The boy looked tense seeing his grandparents, but Janet encouragingly pushed his shoulder. "Grandpa, Grandma, do you want to see what I made?" Michael asked in a small voice. David smiled gently. "We'd love to, Michael." Michael guided his grandparents to his room upstairs. When Janet opened the door, a small workbench came into view. On it was a half-assembled robot, surrounded by neatly arranged tools and electronic components. Blueprints and sketches were posted on the walls, and several completed models were displayed on shelves. "This is what I'm working on now," Michael picked up a small prototype. "It's an assistive robot for children with disabilities. I'm designing it so kids with hand disabilities can use it easily, just by pressing a button to help with daily tasks." David listened to his grandson's explanation with eyes wide in surprise and interest. Martha carefully picked up one of the completed models, examining its details. "Amazing, Michael. Did you make all this yourself?" David asked. Michael nodded. "I studied by researching online and borrowing books from the library." "Why didn't you tell us?" Martha asked quietly. "Us." Michael looked at the floor. "I thought no one would be interested if I told them." Tears welled in Martha's eyes. "Grandpa was wrong," David honestly admitted. He placed his hand on Michael's shoulder. "You are the family's pride. And we were far too late to realize it." Returning to dinner, the three adults engaged in serious conversation. David and Martha reflected on their prejudices and old values, and Janet admitted she should have told the truth earlier. Thomas saw Michael's talent. Janet spoke of her husband's memory. "He always said, 'Michael is special. Let's let him shine in his own way.'" A few days later, unexpected visitors came to Janet's house: Amy, James, and Brittany. In a tense atmosphere, they sat in the living room. "First, let me apologize," Amy said frankly. "My attitude was unforgivable. I'm sorry for looking down on Michael." Janet was slightly surprised by her sister's sincere apology. "How's Brittany?" she asked quietly. Amy let out a deep sigh. "She's seeing a counselor. I finally understand how much pressure I was putting on her." Brittany shyly stepped forward. "Michael, I want you to teach me how to make robots. I actually like science, but I've been studying math and language all the time because that's what everyone expected of me." Michael's eyes lit up. "Really?" "We've cleared all the math trophies and certificates from Brittany's room," James said gently. "We want to give her time to find what she's truly interested in." That afternoon, Michael and Brittany spent time together at Michael's workbench. Michael began teaching his cousin basic programming and how to assemble robots. Seeing the two children cooperating, Janet and Amy also began to gradually repair their sisterly bond. "It reminds me of when we were kids," Amy said quietly. "You always protected me. And now I'm criticizing you," Janet smiled ironically. "But it was necessary," Amy honestly admitted. "I didn't realize what I was doing to Brittany. I was trying so hard to make her perfect that I made her lie." Months later, a science fair was held at school. Michael and Brittany decided to present a joint project. Their exhibit, combining Michael's technical knowledge and Brittany's presentation skills, attracted visitors' attention. "This is an assistive robot for children with disabilities," Brittany explained confidently. "It was Michael's idea and design, and I was in charge of the interface design." Their project won first place and earned a spot in the district competition. Amy hugged her daughter, but instead of praising her grades as before, she celebrated her effort and growth. "What matters isn't the score, but what you learned and how hard you worked." David and Martha also celebrated their grandchildren's success. Martha picked up Michael's trophy and proudly said, "This is the beginning of a new Watson family tradition. Pursuing your passion and enjoying the process." On the day of the district science fair, the whole family gathered to support Michael and Brittany. Their project received high marks from the judges and won a special award. At the awards ceremony, Michael shyly took the microphone. "I want to dedicate this award to my mom who believed in me, and to Brittany who worked hard with me." Brittany also stepped forward and added, "And thanks to our whole family for giving us a second chance." In the audience, Janet and Amy leaned against each other, tears in their eyes along with their parents. A family once divided was now bound by love and mutual understanding. David and Martha had learned to love both grandchildren equally and recognize each of their talents. That night, on the way home, Michael asked his mother, "Mom, am I not the family's embarrassment anymore?" Janet smiled at her son and answered, "Michael, you have always been my pride." 2 years later, a small civic hall in Cedar Rapids was filled with people. The launch event for the Young Inventor Support Program had attracted local politicians, educators, and many children. On stage, Michael and Brittany Watson stood with confident expressions. They were no longer the shy boy and the girl crushed by expectations. "Our robotics education program provides all children with opportunities to express their creativity," Brittany spoke confidently. "Children with learning disabilities, or those who can't find their place in regular classes, can discover their talents here." Michael stepped forward and held up a small robot. This assistive robot is designed to support children with physical disabilities in their daily lives. It's currently being introduced on a trial basis in 3 local elementary schools. Loud applause erupted from the audience. In the front row, Janet and Amy sat proudly, with their parents David and Martha beside them. In these 2 years, they had become a family in the true sense. After the event, the family gathered at Janet's house for what had become a traditional Sunday dinner. The house was still small, but filled with love and laughter. In the kitchen, David helped Janet, while in the living room, Martha listened intently to Michael's latest project. "I can't believe it," Amy said, offering Janet coffee. That day, at Brittany's birthday party, who would have thought it would turn out like this? Janet smiled. "Everything has changed." Amy nodded. "My office now specializes in child advocacy. It's much more fulfilling than chasing numbers." She took a breath. "I learned from Michael that success isn't necessarily just about scores or salary." Outside the window, James was helping Michael and Brittany build a wooden stand. The 2 children, originally a lawyer and an architect, now exchanged robotics terminology that many adults couldn't understand. "Michael's school grades have been improving too," Martha said, watching her grandchildren. "Yes, but we've learned that's not all that matters," Janet answered. "He's growing at his own pace. And most importantly, he's growing into a kind-hearted person." David smiled as he brought a salad bowl from the kitchen. I've started volunteering at the local school, teaching children the importance of creative thinking. An old teacher's new passion. After dinner, Janet suggested taking a new family photo. Gathered in the backyard, they positioned Michael and Brittany in the center, proudly holding their latest robot project. Smiling adults surrounded them. The camera timer was set, and as everyone said, "Cheese," in unison, Janet remembered that one photograph she had bravely pulled out that day. How that small action had changed the family. Sometimes, it takes courage to show the truth, but it ends up saving the ones you love, she thought quietly. The flash went off, and a new memory was forever captured. The family had now become a family, in the true sense, respecting each other's differences, recognizing each other's strengths.